is Doug DeMuro, and today I'm going to tell you my 7 favorite cars I've ever reviewed. This is a hard one. I've reviewed thousands of cars, probably into the 2,000 plus range at this point, and I narrowed it down to my 7 very favorites in order, and I'm going to give them to you now. Before we get started, are you ready for your next cool car? Sell your enthusiast car on Cars and Bids. Trading in your car to dealers means you aren't getting market value for your car, leaving you with less cash for your next fun car. Just look at our recent sales of these cool cars compared to current trade-in value. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is the trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Get started now on carsandbids.com. Sell on Cars and Bids and join the best community to sell your enthusiast car. Okay, so my 7 favorite cars I've reviewed. This is actually tremendously challenging to do. I have the DOUGSCORE, which kind of more or less objectively sort of ranks all the cars, but just because a car ranks really high in the DOUGSCORE doesn't mean I love it, right? We all have stuff that like, oh, that's the best, but I don't like it because of XYZ. I like how something looks better, or I like how something else is quirkier or weirder or more special or more personal to me or whatever. And so the cars that are ranked the very highest in the DOUGSCORE are the best cars I've ever reviewed, but they're not necessarily my personal favorite. So I went through all the videos I've ever done to try to narrow down my 7 personal favorites in order, and I'm going to tell them to you now and kind of explain why they are my favorites and why I absolutely love these cars, even if they're not necessarily at the top of the DOUGSCORE. So let's get started. Number 7 favorite car I have ever reviewed, that would be the Lamborghini Huracan Sturato. This is the off-road version of the Lamborghini Huracan. I have always loved the Huracan ever since I've reviewed one years ago, kind of in the early days of me reviewing other people's cars on my channel, probably a decade ago at this point. And I've always loved the Huracan. I think it drives well. It has turned out to be fairly reliable. I think it is incredibly quick steering and amazing acceleration. It's an incredible car. But one of the problems that I have in general with today's supercars is that they're all so focused and so hard-edged, and they're just kind of annoying to use. They're just like a little bit too kind of much. And so a couple of years ago, Lamborghini calls me out and they say, hey, do you want to go to the review, the launch of this new Huracan Sturato? And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. It was at Chuckwalla, which is fairly near to me in San Diego, and so I'm willing to go to that because it's close by. I said, all right, I'll go. And so I went out there, and I wasn't expecting much. The Huracan by this point was an old car. It was imminently going to be replaced. Of course, we now know with the Temerario. This was going to be a run-out model. They hadn't said much about it, but I figured I might as well do the video anyway. Get there, find out that it is an off-road Huracan, which the rumors had said that it would be. And I love like crazy, kooky, weird builds like that. And I was absolutely astonished that Lamborghini would go and make an off-road build of the Huracan supercar, especially in a world where they didn't then and still don't make an off-road build of their SUV, the Urus. And so I was immediately impressed when I saw the car, knobby tires and, off-road driving lights and a roof basket. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Just such a weird, quirky Doug style thing. And then I drove the car and I absolutely loved it. And is by far my favorite Huracan to drive because due to the off-road modifications, it rides a lot better. There is more suspension travel. It just is a much more comfortable ride than the Focus sports car like Huracan Evo, Huracan STO kind of thing. But in addition to that, it also has more ground clearance. You're not scraping everywhere. Like, it struck me as a drivable supercar, but also like this crazy, ridiculous off-road supercar. It's just so absurd. I can't believe that they made it. And I left that event and immediately called my local Lambo dealer who I'd had a previous relationship, and I said, I want to be on the list to buy one. And it was the first time that's ever happened after reviewing a car. I was like, I'm buying it. Done, doing it right now. I got on the list, and it was maybe 6 months later that they called and said, hey, your position on the list is up. If you want to order one, we're ready for the order. And I really seriously considered doing it, but at the same time, I was also considering a Countach, and it just so happened that a great Countach sort of listed for sale at that exact same time, and I bought the Countach instead of the Sterrato. I have never regretted that. I absolutely love my Countach. It is my favorite car that I've ever owned. However, I love the Sterrato to this day, and it ranks as my number 7 favorite car that I've ever reviewed. Okay, next up, number 6 favorite car that I've ever reviewed. This is a very Doug car, the Smart Crossblade. So years ago, I'm the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles, and I have always kind of worked together. And years ago, they call me and say, hey, we got a Smart Crossblade that we want to sell. We want to put it on Cars and Bids. Will you do a review of it? And I had known what the Crossblade was before. I've actually seen them in their natural habitat in the south of France before. And I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And the Crossblade, of course, is a smart car that doesn't have windows or a roof or a windshield or really even doors, just sort of panels that kind of close part of the cabin. And I was so pumped to do it. And I went up there to LA and I reviewed the car, and then we did sell it on Cars and Bids, and it sold for big money. And the thing that was interesting to me about the Crossblade, I knew it was going to be weird and quirky and interesting, and then it turned out to be way more weird and quirky and interesting than I expected. And since then, on Cars and Bids, we've actually sold quite a few more Smart Crossblades. I think we've sold 4 or 5, and they've all sold for big money. And I was actually bidding on 2 of them. I was really interested in bidding on them, and I kind of got up there, but they sell for like 50 grand, and to me, that was a lot more than I was willing to drop on a windshieldless smart car. But that car was even cooler than I thought it would be, even more ridiculous and absurd and hilarious than I thought it was going to be. And I really, truly loved every minute of my Smart Crossblade experience. And that's another one where I came away from the review and I really actually legitimately wanted to own that car. And then I actually did try to pursue that in some degree. Now, I later kind of came to the conclusion it's not actually all that practical for me. 2 seats, no top, it's ridiculous. And I'm not really going after a Smart Crossblade anymore, but I have loved the car ever since I did the video on it. And I still really think it's one of the most absurd, ridiculous, awesome, funny creations ever. I'm thrilled that it exists, and I'm thrilled that I was able to make a video with it. Okay, next up, number 5 of my favorite cars I have ever reviewed. That would be the 2005 Ford GT, one of which is sitting behind me. And that's because unlike the previous 2, which I reviewed and then wanted to buy, the Ford GT I reviewed and then actually bought. And the story of that is kind of interesting. I was living in Philadelphia and I was just starting to do video reviews with viewer cars. And one viewer had reached out to me with a Tesla Roadster in Syracuse, New York, and another had reached out in Ontario, Canada with a TVR. And I was like, I'm going to make a road trip out of reviewing those 2 cars. And so I did that. And when I got home, and I put the videos up, I got an email from someone else who lived in Ontario. And he said, hey, I never knew you'd be willing to come to Ontario to do a video review, but I saw your TVR review and your Tesla Roadster. And if you are willing to, I have a Ford GT for you. His name was Zach. And so I was like, yeah. So I drove, I had just gotten home like a day or 2 before, got in the car, turned around my Aston Martin, and I drove all the way back to Toronto from Philly, and I reviewed the Ford GT. And wow. I instantly was completely and totally in love. I'd driven a few supercars at that point, but there was something really special about the Ford GT. I loved how it drove. I loved how it looked. I loved the fact that it was robust. One interesting thing about the Ford GT is back then, which was probably 2016, 15, 14, around that era, the Ford GT had a reputation for being unreliable because Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear had owned one and had a lot of problems with it. I came to learn actually from James May, who I spoke to about it personally, that all of Clarkson's problems were related to this aftermarket alarm system and immobilizer that his insurance company had mandated that he install in the car, and it never really gelled with the car's electronics. And I bought my car in 18, and I've driven it 14,000 miles since. It is by far my most robust sports car. There have been times when I have taken it places instead of daily driver cars that I've owned because I am so trusting of it. And it's just been a fantastic car to own. And that was one of the ones where I did the review. I think it was in 16, and I kind of hemmed and hawed, thought about it. I went to Monterey Car Week. I think it was in 18. And I saw a few of them on the road. I was reminded of how much I loved it. And I was like, I got to go get a Ford GT. And that fall of 18, I did go buy this car. So I've had this car now for almost 8 years. I just loved it. I loved it then. I still love it now. It is not particularly surprising that one of my very favorite cars I've ever reviewed, I actually went and bought for myself. And one point I've always made to people about this car is that I didn't review the car well because I loved it. In fact, when I reviewed the car, I didn't even own it. I loved the car because of how it drove in that review. Like, it was a chicken or the egg, but in this case, the one that came first was definitely I drove it, I experienced it, and then I went and bought it. It wasn't because I wasn't a biased reviewer because I loved the car before. I didn't actually have a lot of Ford GT like predilections in my mind before until I drove the car, and I just absolutely loved driving it. Okay, next one, my number 4 all-time favorite car that I have ever reviewed, that would be the Vector W8. I just love weird cars, and I like supercars, if I'm honest. I don't consider myself a supercar guy. I consider myself a quirky car guy, but I also really do love cars that drive amazingly, and often those are sports cars and supercars. And so it ends up that my garage is biased towards sports cars and supercars, and I end up preferring the presence of like really good sports cars. But the quirky part of me also comes out, and that certainly comes out in the Vector W8. This is both a supercar that I truly believe is one of the craziest looking cars ever designed. It is just so focused, so fighter jet, so over-the-top aggressive, but not in an excessive, over-styled way, just like in a really well-done, aggressive, absurd way. Absolutely love that car. I love how it's designed. And the story about the one I reviewed, I got an email. Hey, I got a Vector W8, live in North Jersey. At the time, I was not living in New Jersey area anymore. I lived in Philadelphia for years, but I got the email. I had already moved to California. But I was coming back to that area for an unrelated thing, and I sent the guy an email, and I said, look, I'm going to be back in your area. Can I please review your car? And I came to his house, his estate. And the funny thing about that guy in that car, I still remember, never forget, he didn't have like a massive collection. He had basically a Miura, a Vector, and that was it. He just like went for the absolute pinnacle cars. And I drove that Vector, and it wasn't amazing to drive, but it's so cool and so weird and so quirky and so interesting that I just truly loved that experience. I loved every minute of that experience. And that is one of the cars that I have absolutely loved more than almost any other one I've reviewed. It just is the wonderful intersection of incredible design and quirky and weird and just like, fun driving experience, just something that Doug would absolutely go nuts for. Okay, next up, number 3, undoubtedly the most surprising car on this list. This would be the most surprising car on a top 50 list. Because I showed up to this review not expecting to like this car at all. Number 3 on my list of my favorite cars I have ever reviewed, the McLaren P1 GTR. I've never been a big McLaren guy. I think McLarens mostly are cars that I call rich guy go fast, which means like a rich guy just wants to go fast and he's not a real enthusiast, but McLaren looks cool and they're available at the dealer. I don't have to wait and I'm just gonna get one. And he's not really that sophisticated of a car enthusiast. That's what I think when I think McLaren. And they're great cars, they're fun to drive, but everybody I know who has them kind of has problems with them, and they're just not special to me. They're really, the only requirement to own one is that you are rich. It doesn't require skill to drive or like sophistication to like know which one is kind of the best one and go after that and all that. It's just a car for like a rich guy to point and shoot, go fast. That's my general opinion of McLaren. I'm also not a motorsports guy. I really just don't love car racing. It's not my thing. Every time I've driven a race car, which I've driven a lot of race cars, it's annoying. They're loud. They're difficult to get in and out of. They are hard to deal with on the street. I really am not a big fan of race cars. So I get this email from the McLaren dealer up in Newport Beach to go and film the P1 GTR road converted that they had. And I'm like, I got to do this video because I know the audience is going to want to see this car, but man, there is nothing I want to do less. A race car, which I hate, and a McLaren, which like the P1 is cool, but I'm just not that into these cars. And I go up there and I drive the car, and it was probably the coolest driving experience I've ever had. I just never will forget how focused and how insane and how over-the-top absurd every second I spent in that car was. It was loud, but in a cool way. You could hear the engine, but there was also an amazing amount of intake noise because there's this exaggerated roof scoop. And yes, it was rough to drive, but it was also just so precise and so incredibly dialed in and focused, which I really do love in cars. It was just over-the-top, aggressive, and insane and cool. In the same way that I talk about how I love my Countach because, modern cars don't exist like this anymore. Modern cars may be faster and they may be quicker 0 to 60, but it's the feel of the Countach that I like the most. Honestly, that's how I felt in the P1 GTR. It was just such a focused, expressive, over-the-top, fast, fun car. And I remember coming away from that video thinking, wow, this was an unbelievable experience. And to this day, I still remember it. I still remember enjoying it so much. And I still believe that if I had really crazy money, I would go pick one of those up. Those cars are $3 million plus, maybe more now. I definitely cannot afford one, especially given its incredibly limited use case. But I loved driving that car in a way that I never would have expected. Okay, next on the list, number 2 favorite car I've ever reviewed. That's an easy one. You knew it was coming, the Porsche Carrera GT. Absolutely love the Carrera GT. I have driven many cars over the years, and I really believe that the Carrera GT is one of the greatest driving cars ever manufactured. And on my particular Carrera GT, I replaced the old suspension with a modern suspension, new technology, and I really think that with that suspension change, the Carrera GT may just be the greatest driving car ever manufactured. It is just an unbelievable driving experience. And I have always loved the Carrera GT since it came out when I was 16, but I have especially gotten an appreciation for them since I've driven them. And I've driven them in 2 reviews. Years ago, I reviewed a Carrera GT at Porsche of Beechwood near Cleveland in Ohio. And then years after that, I reviewed my friend Tom Frick's Carrera GT, and I got a lot more in-depth on the car in that video. And of course, years after that, I bought one. And I just really think that is one of the all-time great cars to drive ever. One of the truly great driving experiences. And again, I like quirky cars, I like weird stuff, but I also just like really precision cars that are amazing to drive. And there is really nothing more precise and more surgical and more focused of a driver's car than a Carrera GT. It's funny because right now I have a new 911 GT3 at my house as a press car, and I'm driving it around and I'm thinking this car makes me appreciate my Carrera GT even more because 20 years on, the GT3 feels more skittish, less in control, less balanced than the 20-year-old Carrera GT. It is just such an unbelievable car. There is basically no car that I think is more impressive, with the exception of number 1 on my list. My favorite car that I have ever reviewed is the Ferrari F50. F50 is kind of the hated one. I mean, that's not what the values say. They're worth $10 million. But when you think about your most favorite Ferrari enthusiast car, everybody talks about the F40. People of a certain age talk about the Enzo. The F50 is oft forgotten, I think, in that discussion, in part because it's a little funky looking, and also because it is so rare that most people have never really even had the chance to get to know one, to spend any time with one. No matter where you live, there is a good chance that at some car meet near you, an F40 will show up. You will see one in a showroom or something. And the LaFerrari, same situation. F50s, that is not always the case. There are people, car enthusiasts, who have gone decade-long plus periods without ever seeing an F50. If people got the chance to spend time in one, and specifically to drive one, I think they would come away with the same conclusion I have, which is it is quite possibly the greatest driver's car of all time. There's actually a lot of Carrera GT in the F50. You have the same sort of focused carbon fiber construction. You have an engine derived from motorsport use, obviously mid-engine car. There's a lot of similarities between the two. But I'm disappointed to admit that I think Ferrari actually did it better at that time. I think the Enzo is not better, but I think the F50 is. The F50 is a lighter car. Despite the way the F50 looks, which is a little bit ungainly, it is actually more athletic, at least that's how it feels to me, than the Carrera GT. And frankly, the clutch is just easier, which is always a problem with the Carrera GT from a start-stop. Once you're moving, the Carrera GT has quite possibly the greatest clutch ever made. But the F50's shifter clutch action is truly incredible.
And I really, really do love that car. It is really special. It is probably the only car that I would one-for-one trade my Carrera GT for if I could. But obviously, F50s are a lot more expensive, and I think I've missed that boat. So those are my favorite cars I've ever reviewed. Now, you may be surprised to see that the Countach is not on this list because it is my favorite car that I've ever owned, and I've made that really clear. However, I've reviewed 2 Countaches in addition to my own, and I will say when I drove those cars for my video reviews, I did not feel that way when I reviewed them, that they were the greatest cars I had ever driven. Reviewing old cars is kind of challenging. Old cars don't necessarily always cooperate when you are reviewing them. The Countaches that I reviewed actually cooperated perfectly, and they were dead reliable for my whole video shoot, but it still requires a level of finesse and kind of anxiety throughout the video shoot that you don't have to do with like a new car with push button start, that you just go for it. And as a result of that, I really wasn't a big Countach person when I reviewed the cars. My most recent Countach video before I bought my car, it went live in May of 23, and I had filmed it a little bit before that, maybe like March. Maybe February. And I wasn't that into the car, which is funny because I bought mine in September of 23, maybe 6 months later. It just must have been planted in my mind. But I still think that reviewing the car, it didn't go down as, oh God, this is incredible, I have to have this. That feeling kind of developed over time with my car. And I have come to the feeling that it is like the most incredible thing. But it really wasn't that, I didn't really have that thought at the time, which is kind of crazy. But sometimes that happens. And actually that has given me a valuable lesson about reviewing cars, which is, yeah, you can say a lot of stuff when you review a car and you can really have a good experience. And if you have a lot of experience reviewing a car, you can really kind of get quickly acquainted with the car and tell people how it is. But it doesn't equal real time. Like 6 months with the Countach, it has become my favorite car. 3 hours with a Countach, that's not how I felt. And it has really kind of changed, reframed how I think about car reviews. I think I do a pretty good job of figuring out a lot about a car in a relatively short amount of time, but it is still, sometimes you just need more time to really understand a car. And I think that's lacking in car reviews sort of necessarily based on how car reviews are. And I think that was an interesting lesson learned from the Countach. But there you go. Those are my 7 favorite cars I've ever reviewed. A lot of cars on my list, and tough to whittle it down, but those are my favorites.